All right, guys, I am really stoked and really excited and thankful to have my guest today. This is Ed Newton Rex. He is the creator of Fairly Trained. If you've not heard of Fairly Trained, you do need to know about it. I think it's a really important addition to this very chaotic and uncertain future we're facing with generative AI music and human music makers. And all of the legal battles that are probably about to come out of it, and all of the questions surrounding can generative AI models train off of publicly available copyright music without asking for consent, without compensating the copyright owners. It's a big debate right now. We're not clear on how that's going to shake out. There are definitely many opinions on it, but what's really interesting about Ed is he's not waiting for the courts essentially to make their ruling. He's basically coming into the marketplace and trying to provide a solution to create some trust and some level of transparency between the public, music makers, and these generative AI companies that are popping up, it seems like every other week now. So Ed, he is a visionary. He actually got started in this AI generative space back in 2010, which is actually like, I don't even understand. I'm really curious to pick his brain on how he even thought about generative AI music in 2010. Where did that come from? But he started a little company called Juke Deck back in the day, and he worked on it for many, many years, probably laughed at by many people, thought that he was wasting his time. And eventually, though, he did get bought out. He sold it to ByteDance, which is the owner of TikTok. So I'm really curious about that, how that came about. And then he started to move into become the VP of audio at Stability AI. Stability AI, they were the ones that recently released Stable Audio 2.0. The one thing I have appreciated about that offering is they were publicly disclosing, hey, we trained our music off of Audio Sparks, 800,000 tracks. They were all consent. So it was like, cool, that feels great that it was consensual and it's transparent and it's showing everybody this is how we did our training. But this is what's really admirable and really interesting about Ed is he actually resigned a pretty prominent, the VP of audio at that company over their stance on fair use. So I'm going to ask Ed about his opinion on that and why he decided to make kind of a scary move like that, a really principled move, but also a very scary one to kind of step away from something that prominent. And then now he's moved into this new place of creating Fairly Trained. So before I hand it off to you, Ed, I also want to let everybody know that Ed is also a musician and a composer. And that's actually probably the most qualifying for me. It's probably one of the most qualifying features of you to be in this space is because you have to kind of have some skin in the game, I think, to understand how it feels to be on this side of the equation. So the fact that, and I listened to your music, you got beautiful piano music, amazing choral music. You got an amazing talent that you have worked on and honed for all of your life. And so you guys can go check out, listen to his music, go check out Fairly Trained, and go check out a lot of what Ed has to offer our space in the description box below. So Ed, with that intro out of the way, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you give us a quick history on your journey from 2010 to now with Fairly Trained? How has this played out for you?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jesse. It's awesome to be here and to be speaking to you and to be speaking to people, all your followers. Yeah, I've been in generative AI so long that we didn't call it generative AI when we got going. So I was, I mean, I still consider myself a composer first, and I was going down the route of kind of having a fledgling career as like a classical composer. And in 2010, it was actually like a year or two before, in like 2008, 2009, I became like really just interested in the idea of what we now think of as generative AI. Really just the question of like, hey, like why has no one managed to teach computers to write music yet? It was generally like more of an academic question than anything. And I guess in my, with the naivety of youth, I kind of like focused more on the upside than the downside. And I was really excited about some of the things I still think are actually pretty exciting about generative AI, like the ability to inspire people in their work, the ability to help people complete their work quicker and like let them make more. The ability maybe like with music to like give you this kind of idea of like a personalized soundtrack to your life, which I still like actually really like, and still no one has actually done well. And so all these ideas, like I really liked them, and I, again with the naivety of youth, I kind of thought, well, I'll just go build it. And so I started learning coding, and I started building what was in hindsight like a very simple system, but it took me like 2 years to build this rule-based system. I kind of translated a lot of my knowledge of music theory into a set of rules and built this system. And then we raised some investment, which was hard to do back then because no one was investing in this stuff. And And we grew gradually and slowly, and I think we were the first AI music company. And then and yeah, we released a product, and eventually we got bought by ByteDance, and went there. And then I actually spent a bit of time at Snapchat as well, working on a music product. And then so throughout this long journey, kind of was focused on this area, and I ended up actually like getting in touch with Stability, who had just kind of released Stable Diffusion, this big image generator. Um, and kind of wanting to do it again, like wanting to say, well, look, okay, like let's try to build this now with modern technology. But you know, critical to that view was always this idea that like you have to work with creators if you're going to build this technology. And it's funny, like throughout the 2010s, we now look at generative AI and we see like people scraping people's work and training models on it, which I, by the way, like in answer to your question, no, that should not be allowed, and I don't think it is allowed. I think it's against the law, and I think it's clearly unethical. Um, but so what's funny is that actually, like, this only started really happening in like 2022, right? When a couple of big systems, like in other modalities, not in music, were released that, I don't need to name. They're very famous, right? And they trained on copyrighted work without permission. And because they did really well and they made loads of money and like they got loads of investment, everyone has copied them. And so the whole generative AI field has taken this path. But when we were working on it in the 2010s, no one did this. Like you did not scrape people's work. You did not even like Google, who had like they like a few years after we started, they created this team to work on AI music. They commissioned data sets. They literally like went and paid musicians, which is what we did, right? We went and paid musicians. We got data sets to train on. And so it was all done fully with consent. And so when I went to Stability, like we wanted to build that model with consent. We wanted to do it this way, to license training data, right? To not do what other people are doing. And then we released Stable Audio, version one in September last year, and it went down really well. I think it was the best model out there at the time, and it was trained on licensed data, right? And we wanted to show you don't have to like steal people's stuff. You can work with musicians, um and so then yeah, I mean, I have huge respect for what the music team at Stability do, but I ended up resigning because of like the approach of the wider company and the wider industry. There was the US Copyright Office put out a call for like comments from anyone on, hey, like, what do you think about generative AI and copyright? And like Stability were one of many companies who responded publicly and said, we think it's fair use. We basically think we can use whatever we want. And we don't have to pay for it. We don't have to ask permission. And I thoroughly disagree with that view. And so I quit. And yeah, and then really like, since then it's really hit me that, this big change in generative AI has happened, and people are now taking this, what I think is this supremely unethical approach that I think could be the destruction of the creative industries. And so what I've been trying to do is do whatever I can to like show that there is another path. Now at Stability, what I was trying to do was like build an alternative, right? And I think that's a really important thing. And I have huge admiration for people who are still out there building better alternatives. But I think I tried to look at like, okay, what else do you need? And so that ultimately brought me to like Fairly Trained, which we can talk about more, and has led, and has really led to me now spending all my time on this, I think this existential issue for musicians and other creators. If we let this happen as it's currently happening, if you are worried about this, you are right to be worried about this. It is existential without a doubt.
Absolutely. I'm hearing comments more and more these days of people not only thinking about giving up from what we do, which is sync licensing, but across the
Yeah,
board, like not making music anymore. And that
yeah,
happens from time to time in everybody's life where they sort of fall in love with music
yeah,
creation and out of love. But this is kind of hitting us as a glacier across the board of wiping people. It feels like off the map. And
yeah,
so that's something that I definitely don't want to minimize or brush past or just be like, whatever, get over it. It's like, this is kind of a serious moment, and it is a serious moment for us. I have
yeah.
a
I
question
agree.
for you. So with Stability AI, they have been one of the few that I've been impressed with at least their music model. I'm not familiar with the other models they've been generating, but they were the ones, as I mentioned before, that put right on their front page. You don't have to dig for it. It's not like in their FAQs or in their terms of service. It's right there on the front site. We paid, we licensed, we've got permission for these tracks. So, how on one side of their mouth they're saying we believe in compensating and consent for training our models, and we're going to show that off on our website. But then when they talk to the copyright office, they say, but we think it's fair use and we don't have to do this. Can you maybe elaborate as to why they have these kind of different positions?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's difficult for me to like talk about like non-public stuff, obviously. So I guess what I'd say is I was really proud of the approach we took with stable audio. I do think that it showed people that you can take another approach. The when a company submits something to the Copyright Office, it's the entire company, right? It's not just one team, right? And we were only the music team, we were the audio team. That response wasn't an audio team response, right? It was a company response. And I think it's on public record, like what how some other models that Stability have created have been trained, right? Like you look at the initial Stable Diffusion, and the kind of work that was trained on, that's on public record, and it's a different approach to stable audio. So, honestly, I think it's just companies like this that have many different models, they have different teams working on them, different teams might think different things. But I'm very proud of I am proud of what we did on the music team and what they continue to do, now that I've left as well. I think it's pretty clear that they're, sticking to that philosophy, which is great.
That makes sense. Yeah, and of course, any company who doesn't have to pay, doesn't have to do the extra work to go get clearances and pay for licenses, probably would want to take that path regardless. So I obviously imagine why every company who's looking at certain other companies that have succeeded without getting these clearances, without paying, are going like, oh, it's a lot cheaper to run these things. Let's go for that. So it makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. I try not to, I'm sure you as well. Like it's not like a personal thing, but it's more of like a business decision that a lot of these companies are making of going, if I don't have to, then I'm not going to, right? So it usually is
Honestly,
that sort
it's
of
a
bottom line concern. Yeah.
yeah, and it's a and just the problem is people are sheep. They copy other people, and if a couple of big companies, as is the case, seem to be getting away with it, then of course others are going to reduce their licensing costs by huge amounts and copy them and try to get away with it as well. Like unfortunately, it does make business sense, and that's a real problem.
Absolutely. And we will only be treated with the respect that we demand. It's like one of those things where
Yeah.
we've had this debate in our, community of some people are like, it's absolutely worth putting up every possible legal blockage and anything we can possibly do to fight. Others are saying, what's the point? They're just going to run over us anyways. Big tech always gets what they want. And my point of view is the same as yours. It's like any button we can possibly press to fight for our rights and our relevance, we need to be pressing it. Doesn't mean that any or all of them are going to work, but if we've got them, I think it's definitely worth trying, because you definitely need to let people know how to respect you. Otherwise, they will absolutely, if they can, they'll run right over you and take what they can get. So let's
Yeah.
talk about Fairly Trained and your
Yeah.
standards. So AI generative companies, you've definitely put your stamp on quite a few companies. Maybe you can let us know how many. And give us a quick, I know there's 4 qualifications you're looking for when companies come to you. Give us what those 4 qualifications are to give them a stamp of approval, and about how many companies have you certified so far?
Yeah, so Fairly Trained is a non-profit, and when we certify companies, basically for not training on copyrighted work without permission. So there are a few ways that a company can achieve that. The most obvious way is like go and license your training data, but there are other ways you can do it as well. Like there is, for instance, in music, there's like, it's a small amount, but there's a limited amount of like public domain data you can use. And that as well, like we permit on our certification, Creative Commons data. You can own your own data. There are many ways you can do it, but you can't just go and use scrape data without permission. Really, that's the crux of it. It's easiest to frame it in that way. We've certified 13 companies, and I think 11 of them are or touch on music, and being music companies. Beethoven, Boomy, Endel, Frostbite Orkings, which is a band, Infinite Album, Lemonade, Life Score, Rightsify, Soms, Soundful, and Tuny, I think, are on music one. So like lots of music that partly comes from the fact that like I've been in the music world, and so I know more music companies, but we've also got people in other modalities as well. And yeah, and so really that's a critical issue. There is lots that we don't cover. And we like, as I was putting this together, like one of the key things on my mind was like, as you said like earlier, you don't want to wait for the law. And at the moment, we don't want to wait at all. Like ultimately, there is a real danger that if people don't act now, this stuff will become so normalized that there is no going back. At the moment, I think we have a window of opportunity to actually change things. It's not too late to change people's practices. This, like what's going on may well be illegal, and these systems are not so popular yet that the courts won't be able to roll that back. So so now is the time. I think one of the things that was on my mind when starting this was responsible AI is a vast field. There are lots of things you can focus on. I really wanted to narrowly try to help solve this specific issue. And in particular, I wanted to do one main thing, which is, you know, after I quit, I was kind of like talking to a bunch of journalists and people, and I was saying, look, there are companies who are taking a much better approach. And they were like, who are these companies? And I realized there was no easy way of telling these apart. And what we're basically trying to do is show that there is a major difference between companies, many of which you've heard of, which just go and claim they can use basically whatever they like, um, without permission or without payment, and companies that are not taking that approach, that instead are being much more careful and much more respectful, and are generally licensing or using public domain or something like that, right? Um, and so that's the division that we're trying to make clear with a simple, fairly trained badge. Now there's a bit of confusion there, and like the part of the problem is we had to choose a name. And I actually think Fairly Trained is quite a good name. I'm pretty pleased with it. People seem to like it. The problem is it's like fair is in like the word fair is in, like inherently that's very subjective. There's lots that could come into fairness. Like, so we try to be very explicit. Like there's a whole lot we don't cover. We're not saying the companies we've certified are perfect. What company is, frankly. What we are saying is that they have taken this better approach to getting their training data as we define by essentially not using scraped data. So that's what we're doing. And I mean, 13 companies is pretty good for like a young nonprofit with no money and with one person. Like it's a good start, but it's also like very hard in that like most of the AI industry does not take this approach. So there are simply way more companies that we cannot certify than that we can. It's slow going, but hopefully we are helping to show that there is a difference between these types of companies.
Really interesting. So, as a one-man operation, I'm sure you've got a lot of work on your hands. How are you verifying these claims? So these companies come to you, they say, we believe in it and we actually want your certification because we want to show the public we're doing things differently with consent. And they tell you, yeah, this is what we did. We trained it off of public domain, or we created our own library, or we paid a bunch of musicians or producers to give us a data set. How are you verifying any of this stuff? What receipts are you looking for to make sure that they're telling the truth?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll start by saying it's not perfect, right? We don't have any like automated systems that actually go and check. So it's trust based, like to a major degree, but like other certification schemes are as well. So actually, how we do this is we have a written submission. We have 9 questions that they have to answer and give detail for, and the main part of this is what is your training data. We go into some detail on that, and so then after they've submitted this, we have an often lengthy back and forth where we discuss it. Like anything that's not clear, we make sure we've dived into it. They make some commitments around this. We ask for licenses, like so we ask to see the licenses where they have the licenses to use the data, and we actually evaluate the wording in those licenses as well. So we do due diligence on that. If they're public data sets, we ask for the links and we go and check them. We often have to dive in further because, like, for instance, we're pretty strict on things like, lots of companies will use third-party models, which themselves are trained on something else.
Mm.
So the same they have to hit the same, those models have to hit the same standards. We also, like, a lot of companies will use what's called synthetic data. Which is kind of data that is created by another model, which they'll then train their model on. So again, the models that we use to create that synthetic data, they have to hit the same bars as well. And this does, I obviously won't name names for like confidentiality reasons, but we've had a bunch of companies apply who we haven't certified ultimately. And sometimes it will be because they use a third-party model and the data is just not clear. We're not sure enough what the training data is for that model. That model may say, hey, we train fairly, but we just don't really know. We haven't dived into the detail. So that's essentially how we do it. It is trust-based. It's a written submission. It's a back and forth. It's often a bunch of phone calls. And there is obviously room for error there, and there's room for lying. We think at the moment that in general, the divide is so clear between these kinds of companies that one, most people aren't going to lie, and two, actually, it tends to people in the know, to people in these fields, it tends to actually be pretty obvious in a way what kind of data people have trained on. And so you're probably going to be able to red team the model to like use the model. Like if someone says they're fairly trained, and then you can use the model and go and generate Bohemian Rhapsody from that model, you're going to have some questions about that. So that's how we do it. It's not perfect, but I think it's my general feeling is that it's much better than not existing. And it's pretty much all we can do with the limited resources we have.
It's great to know. And speaking of that, you gave an amazing and wrote an amazing article prompting Udio and showcasing how its output is scarily similar to very popular copyrighted artists like the Beatles, like the
Hmm.
Bee Gees, and many, many other artists. And my jaw was dropping as I was reading that article and looking at what your prompt was and looking what it outputted. We obviously don't have confirmation on what they're doing behind the scenes, but obviously, if your model can produce what it's producing, I'll link that below. You guys should definitely go take a read on that. That one was really, really eye opening, and I really appreciate you doing that because I've gotten definitely some pushback of people saying like, "Oh, it's all derivative. They're never going to step on any copyright." It's like, well, have you looked at this article? Because this article is kind of showing that, sure, it's not the exact copy, right? It's not like storing the song and reproducing it, but boy, is that close enough to copyright infringement? I'm not a lawyer, but to me, yes, it's close enough that we're going to be running into some issues. So, I also wanted to ask you a technical question because you have some experience as a generative AI, data scientist, so to speak. Is it possible to look into an AI model to see its data set, to see actually what is in it that it is trained on, so that if a company comes to you and says, "Oh yeah, it's all cleared," can you look under the hood? Is that even possible technically with these companies?
Um, like the simple answer to that is no, but there are ways around that. So I think that there are ways at either end of the model, if you like. Like on the output side, you can do what I've done for Udio and also Suno, which is that you can like what's called like red teaming. You can red team the model. So basically, you can use the model to see what it outputs, right? And if you prompt it right, and if you kind of know how to prompt these models, you can kind of see what it outputs, and that doesn't tell you definitely what's in the training set. But if you've got, as you said, if you've got output that resembles copyrighted music, you start to ask serious questions about whether that might be in the training set, right? So you can do that, and that's always good. And that's also what like the New York Times did in their case against OpenAI and Microsoft with their large language model. They did a bunch of red teaming. In general, you can kind of use the model, get output, and that helps you. Um, on the other end, though, you can also I mean, these companies should really be storing records of their training data, and there are, there is regulation that's been proposed that's actually coming in the EU and that's been proposed in the US as well that would, you know, that would require companies to some extent, be transparent about their training data, which is a great thing. One of the things that we certify actually is we only certify companies who keep records of their training run. So what goes into each training run of a model. So basically what their training data is. So they have to keep internal records. And internal records should be kept and usually will be kept. If they're not being kept, that is pretty suspicious, right? So I think there's always auditing you can do. Now the companies might not let you audit them. They might not let you look. But they should have the records of what they trained on. So you shouldn't ever really have to, if we manage to set up legislation, regulation, if we manage to set these up right, you shouldn't have to work out what goes into a model. You should just be able to quiz a company on that, hopefully publicly.
Got it. That's great to know. Yeah, and we've been talking about that law proposal as well. Yeah, we'll see where that one goes. So one question I have for you, I was looking at some of the companies you guys have certified. One of them, I don't want to name a specific one, but one of them, and I don't know if many of them share this, but one of them for sure did not disclose on their website anywhere where they're getting their data, but they have your fairly trained stamp on it. So I thought, okay, that's kind of peculiar because if you're fairly trained, why don't you just tell us where you got your stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I really want to ask you that question. But the other thing too is, I think what's causing for me, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think for many other people as well, one of these particular websites had, to me, self-contradictory language in describing what they were doing. So their language said something to the effect of, while other AI models are training on existing copyrighted music, our AI model analyzes existing tracks. And I thought, that's just probably poetry for saying the same thing. It sounds like you're doing exactly what they're doing. You are training on something, and it sounds like you're also training on tracks. Maybe it's not copyrighted tracks. But it wasn't clear on that. It didn't say, hey, this is public domain, or this is licensed, or this is, hey, we paid these people. So I'm curious, in your certification requirements, why hasn't that requirement been there in terms of requiring companies on their website, just like how Stability did? Here's where we got it.
Yeah.
Having some sort of just right on your homepage, this is where we got our data and it was consensual. Why is that not part of the certification process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's a fair question. And as I said earlier, I do, for what it's worth, I actually hope that companies will be required by law to reveal their training data. And I think there's a decent chance that happens, and that's a great thing. I think the thing is, when I was thinking about this, like, publicly disclosing training data it's really like a means to an end. It's we want it to ensure that people are training fairly. It's not in and of itself important. It's important because of the effect of it. And so when I was planning Fairly Trained, I wanted to reward people and showcase people who are training fairly. And what I saw at the time was I saw very few companies. I mean, stability, we'd done this with Stable Audio, and I had done that, right? Like, but I saw very few other companies or teams revealing their training data like comprehensively. What I saw more of was companies who actually did explicitly claim to be training fairly, claim not to be scraping. And so basically, like, in all honesty, I figured there's no point having a certification that no one can hit, right? I figured we could get more companies signed up if we focused on certifying what their training data actually is. We achieve the same thing, I think. Like, we still make sure that they are training fairly, which is ultimately the end goal. Um, you know, so I think by taking that approach, I think we've managed to find and certify more companies who are training fairly than we would have if we were focused on transparency. I do think that, for what it's worth, I mean, look, there's a lot we don't. Transparency isn't the only thing we don't cover, right? Like, there is lots we don't cover. We don't cover opt-in versus opt-out. We don't cover specific terms of payment. We don't cover like transparency. Obviously, we don't cover like, we don't request that people give credit to data providers. We don't cover, like, I think there's an interesting question around the use case. Like, maybe you're only being fair if your use case is specifically designed not to compete with people. I think there's a lot that we could cover. I think I had to draw the line somewhere, basically, and the decision we made, with advisors as well, was like, if this is the problem we're trying to solve, which is like to show that there is a difference, the crucial thing is having seen what they've trained on and having checked that. And so if we can do that, we probably for now don't need anything else. Having said that, I agree with you that, like, I want to see transparency. I want to see all sorts of things. And I think there's a good chance that, I hope that we will kind of expand, add to our certification down the line. I also frankly hope that we won't need to with transparency, because I hope it'll just be a legal requirement. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding. As I say, like, I think the important thing to remember when you're looking at something like Fairly Trained is that we don't cover everything. And when you're looking at any certification, like, make sure you check what it covers. And frankly, when you're looking at, like, and this is really important, bear in mind that every AI company in the world will tell you that they're being responsible. Like, it's very, very easy to say, always go and check the small print, always go and check what they've actually signed up to, and then make your own decision. And for some people, like, a Fairly Trained certification might not be enough. I mean, I think it should go a long way, but it might well not be enough. And you may want to see more than that. And if so, demand that from people, demand that from us, demand that from the companies themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. Words are cheap. Ethical AI,
Words are
responsible
cheap.
AI, these are just
Yeah.
slogans thrown around all over the place. They're kind of worthless.
Yeah.
So I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, big part of this is trust, and sort of it does feel like we are at odds right now between music makers, music producers, who I sort of represent here on this channel, in this community,
Yeah.
versus tech companies, AI generative companies. And, I could even go devil's advocate, defending, steel manning their point of view of like, well, we might have a competitive edge for how we train our data and what we're really doing. Even if it's ethical and consensual, we don't want to just give that to our competitors. So I can understand how they're like, yeah, we want to be stamped, but we're not going to just give away the secret sauce as to how we're doing what we're doing. Totally can understand that. And that might be something that will never cross over that. But of course, then it leaves us all going, okay, so then if they don't tell us, and maybe some of the language on their website's kind of like leading us to believe that you're just playing word games with us, who can we trust? And I think that's what is so important about what you're doing, making yourself available like this, putting out the articles you're putting out and just creating, because your whole business model right now is your own credibility, right? Like people have to now learn to trust you, because if you're the
Yep.
person stamping everybody saying, yep, they're good, well, we have to know, well, is Ed doing the best that he possibly can? And
Yeah.
we want to make sure, obviously, the people that are saying we'll gatekeep for this, we'll make sure that everybody's acting ethically. Of course, you're going to get some scrutiny as well, which I'm sure you were expecting stepping into this role, which is a big, heavy responsibility. So that's what I really appreciate about you just being here and just responding and being a part of this conversation. So as we wrap up here, I want to maybe talk a little bit about what was interesting about, I think you and I coincidentally both believe that there is a chance that this will not pass as fair use in terms of AI models training without consent. Based on the fourth element of fair use, I saw one of your talks where you said that it was basically about, well, if generative AI and you can prompt a song, obviously a chance there, a really high chance that it will replace human creators in terms of, especially for what we do, sync placements and all the background music that you hear in TV shows and foreground music and ads and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know if you heard recently, Red Lobster was, I think, one of the first commercial clients that basically used AI music to promote something. So there you go. There's a gig that was lost to, that could have been a human being's gig. Granted, they're going bankrupt maybe, so maybe that's not the best example, but sure enough, it's sort of like the spear. It's coming into our industry. It's starting to make an effect. And I've made that argument as well. Maybe you can kind of dive in a little bit deeper into your point of view on legally why you don't think that it will pass, and also the ethical implications of AI models basically training off of human beings for free without consent and jumping into our space and essentially taking our jobs, as they say, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so copyright, in there's an international agreement on copyright, right? The Berne Convention, and part of that is, basically just forbids countries from letting copies happen in a way that unfairly prejudices the interests of the author, right? And the point of copyright law is to give people a temporary monopoly on their work, to basically encourage them to share it, to encourage them to make it. And this has been around for a long time, and so countries, like the US have to, like they're signed up, they have to adhere to this. So the fair use exception to copyright law has to adhere to this, and that's why you have that fourth factor. And the fourth factor is, it basically these are factors that have to be weighed up, against each other and in concert with each other when you're evaluating, is this copying a fair use? Should we allow this? It's done on a case-by-case basis, and the fourth factor says, well, what's the effect on the potential market for the value of the original work that was copied, right? And so it's a critical factor, and usually AI companies kind of ignore this a bit. They try to maybe deflect if they're asked about how this competes with humans. They try to deflect, obviously, for this specific reason. And I think what's clear is that these models do compete with what they're trained on. Now, we should be honest and clear. They don't always. I don't, and frankly, I suspect that where we'll end up landing in this space is, like, I don't think that all generative AI training will blanket, be sort of forbidden. I think that would be surprising, but I also think it'd be really surprising if we get to a stage where actually people look at copyright law, look at the fair use exception, and say all generative AI training is allowed as a fair use. I mean, that seems preposterous as well. In my mind, a lot of it comes down to competition. Clearly, we are already seeing it's too early to have all the data, but we already see across not just music, but in other modalities as well, generative AI competes a lot of the time, competes with the data that it's trained on, not only the creators behind that data, but the specific content as well. Put simply, if you have an audio production library and a company comes along and trains on that without permission, that company then has a model that can output huge amounts of new production music that will clearly compete with that. Now, that's theoretical, but we already see it happening. We see it happening in images where there are specific examples of creators losing work, having their income slashed because people are turning to generative AI. We see specific gigs going to generative AI, specific art being used from generative AI that previously would have been a human. We already see this in art. We see people losing jobs. We see specific things going to AI. In music, as a bunch of artists and songwriters put in a public letter a few weeks ago, there is a limited royalty pool on platforms, on DSPs, for instance, that royalty pool is clearly going to be eaten into by AI systems. So if the AI system is trained on your work and is then eating into the royalty pool, it's clearly prejudicing your legitimate interests. It's clearly competing with you. Similarly, there are only so many listening hours in the day. Similarly, there is only so much production music people want. These systems, are clearly competitive, and we're already seeing that. So I think that's really critical, and is the point I focus on the most, and is the point that, as an AI founder, I'll be honest, like I like other people, I deflected, when people, like, what people will say, you will ask an AI founder, and what they will say, well, isn't this competing with humans? And they will say, well, but it's going to create so many new jobs, and ultimately it's an assistive tool, and both of those may well be true. Um, but in my mind, they're totally irrelevant to the copyright discussion, totally relevant to the legal discussion, and pretty relevant to the moral discussion as well. Because you might create new jobs for other people if they retrain. Yeah, absolutely, sure. You might produce an assistive tool that can help people, but you cannot avoid the fact that you are taking people's work without their permission and creating a competitor to those people. So, like my fundamental belief, and this is a very strong belief, and I encourage you to fight for it if you believe it as well, is generative AI competes with the data it's trained on. And so it should license that data. And anything short of that is not good enough. And that's what we should all be fighting for. And if we don't, we will see a bunch of competing systems spring up that destroy entire industries totally unfairly, including but not limited to music and sync licensing and all of the above.
Great points. Obviously, agree with you there. And I think that's a really, really important highlight that you had there in terms of the deflection of, but this is going to birth new industries, but all these great things are going to come out of it. It's like maybe, possibly, but actually, I think likely yes. But that's a theoretical future maybe, as opposed to what's really happening right now, right? And I think you're absolutely right. Just divvying those up to say like, and that's where the courts are going to be in a very tricky position because they're going to want to not hamper technology. They're not going to want to hamper advancements because they know that that's kind of how the standard of living across the board goes up is technology, the arts and the sciences advance. And we definitely don't want to be stopping that too much, but we also don't want to do anything reckless where we are hampering human beings motivation to want to actually create new art, new works of art. So I think that's really important. We'll see, obviously. Stay tuned, guys. We don't know how this is going to work out with the legal implications of it. This is my last question for you, Ed. I appreciate your time. If we do find a situation where the courts do unfortunately side with AI companies right now who are just taking anything they can and training off of it, and they say, you know what, sorry, fair use, and we think it's a benefit for society, game on. Anybody can train off of anything, no permission, no consent, nothing like that. Obviously going to be a black pill, going to be a really, really sad day. Do you have any other optimistic points of view on the future of AI music, any other areas of use within AI technology and AI generative music where you can still see a positive future for us or for anybody with this technology? I'm always looking for, you're planning for the worst case scenario. What do we do if that day comes? I wonder if you've put any thought into where your mindset might go if this is where the courts decide to go.
Honestly, I think that's a dark day. And I think even if that happens, there will still be a bunch of people who don't want to use AI systems like that. And there'll still be a place for AI systems that are trained more fairly. I think the only one I haven't mentioned that I am actually excited about is music education. I think I think it's very realistic to think that within 5 to 10 years, maybe sooner, we'll have real personalized music education. This is at a time when, definitely in the UK where I'm from, arts education funding is generally being slashed, is going downhill. Fewer and fewer people are learning music, which I think is a real shame. And I think that scalable, smart tutors who can listen to what you're doing and say, either you should really use this plugin. Have you thought about this? Or that was great, but your C sharp could have been a bit heavier, whatever it is, right? Like that I think is a really exciting future where actually more people will be able to learn music. It's funny in generative AI, as founders in generative AI, we like to talk about democratization and how what we're doing is democratizing creativity. That's garbage, basically. I mean, like giving people the ability to type in a text prompt and create a song is not democratizing music, really. It's definitely not democratizing creativity. There is nothing creative about that at all. Let's be clear. But I do think that actually, if we can use generative AI to help teach people music, then we actually start to really use AI to democratize creativity, and that's incredibly exciting. So yeah, so that's a big area of focus, I think, for a lot of people. I think something that will be really cool. I think there are upsides to generative AI. I just think right now the way it's being done, the downsides massively outweigh them. So we need to get to a more kind of fair approach of doing it.
Awesome. Obviously, agreeing with you there. So, Ed, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Obviously, thank you for what you're doing with Fairly Trained, for trying to be a part of the solution. That's what I really, I pride myself on. I really want to pride our community on. That's why I think it's really good for us to not feel like we are victims, to do anything we can within our power, in our small little corners of this industry and in our worlds, to try to be a part of the solution to this. There's no easy answers for any of this stuff, but if we're trying, we've got a shot, right? We can at least try to show up and say, hey, let's see if we can do something about this. Because even if, worst case scenario, we don't win this fight in the way that we want to win it, we can hang our heads high saying, hey, we gave it our all, and we didn't just let them take what we felt that they shouldn't just be taking without our consent. So we appreciate you, man. I really do consider you an ally for what we're doing here and for music creators across the world. So keep up the great work. Anything that I can do to help you, anything that we can do to be of service, obviously, please do reach out, and hopefully maybe we can get you for a follow-up interview. Maybe as some of this landscape changes in the next couple of months or the year, and we'll see where things are. So thank you so much for your time. If you guys want to check out more about what Ed's doing with Fairly Trained, definitely go read that article, though. Whatever you do, go click on that link down below where he kind of breaks down what Udio's doing. Go check out his website, listen to his music. He's got beautiful music. You're going to love his music. And he's got some great articles and just a whole bunch of stuff. Ed is a very talented young man. So definitely go check out what he's got going on. And appreciate your time. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. All very nice, except I'm no longer young. But really nice to be here. Thanks a lot. Bye.
It's relative. I'm not either. All right. Thanks, man.